claim is that suffering makes God's existence unlikely. Good work.
Hey, Alex, how's it going?
How's it going? Nice to meet you.
Sage. Why don't you just begin? Why does suffering or evil make God's existence unlikely?
I think when confronted with two hypotheses, so atheism, naturalism, or theism, we should ask what we expect would occur under either hypothesis. And then we look at the world and we see what does actually occur. And what do we find? We find, I think most relevant here, a system of natural selection, the mechanism by which God apparently chose to bring animals and ultimately human beings into existence. A system which is defined by suffering. Survival of the fittest is the same thing as the death and suffering and destruction of the unfit. I'm told that the very mechanism that God chose to bring about the human species as the ultimate end of his creation was one that is imbued with suffering, such that 99.9% of all the species, let alone animals, that have ever existed on planet Earth have been brutally wiped from existence into extinction. And I think that that's less likely on theism. If you assume atheism or materialism, not only do you explain this, you also come to expect it.
What is your, I guess, epistemology? How do you know that this is the case, that it's less likely, and that, you know, an atheist worldview, a naturalistic worldview would look like the way it is today?
Of course we don't know, but that's why I use the phraseology of unlikely. I think that if you were to tell somebody who was sort of in some Rawlsian state of nature, hadn't seen the world, and you said that the world has been created by an omnibenevolent, all-powerful God, what kind of world would that person be imagining? And if you dropped them into the world, if you were given the opportunity to become a wild animal, like in 2 seconds, I was just going to turn you into a random wild animal somewhere on planet Earth.
I like being a guy.
I think you'd probably kill yourself before I had the opportunity, okay, because you know that the life of these animals is almost defined in terms of their suffering.
I guess I just don't really see how you can justify that claim per se. What I would say is that if we actually take into account the holistic view of the scriptures, which I do think that you have to do, we see that it's actually much more coherent once you acknowledge that evil itself doesn't have ontology. Evil's not a thing. You don't look under a rock and say, there's the evil, right?
Fine by me. So I'm not really talking about evil here, because that's, of course, a moral term. I'm talking about suffering.
Can you distinctualize suffering and evil?
So evil is a moral term. Evil means that something is bad, it's immoral. You need to have a moral ontology for that. Suffering is just any experience that's not wanted when experienced, right? And so even if you don't have a moral objectivism, you can still say that suffering exists. So here's a question. A deer gets its leg caught under the branch of a tree that's fallen over in the wild, and it starves to death in confused agony. Why does God oversee this? And why does God set the natural world up such that events like this occur?
Well, because the ultimate view here is that...
Okay, pause.
Nice to meet you.
Former atheist, aspiring Christian, spent 5 years as an atheist. We're going to talk about why Alex's view is wrong. And so all of creation was subject to suffering because of man's rebellion against God. This is all over the Bible, and I know Alex has read it. So Genesis 3:7, then to Adam, he said, because you heeded the voice of your wife and ate from the one tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat from it. Cursed is the ground in your labors. In toil you shall eat from it all the days of your life. There is a recurring theme throughout the Old and New Testament that creation itself is cursed. It's not merely that humans do evil things to each other, and so humanity is experiencing evil. The full reality of creation is not as it was whenever it was initially created. So there's a lot of presuppositions then in Alex's arguments, which are just not taking all of that into account. And I think that the guy who they pulled out after the first 3 minutes was going to kind of get into some of this, but Romans 8:22 then, for we know that the whole creation has been groaning in the pains of childbirth until now, and not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoptions as sons, the redemptions of our bodies. Let's look at Isaiah, a book which you know has been preserved 95% over the course of thousands of years. So whenever atheists make the objection, and this is important, so atheists make the objection that we can't trust the Bible, it's been translated so many times, we can't know if what we're reading is what was written thousands of years ago. Well, due to the extensive manuscript evidence, we can. We know it's on message. None of the variations have altered the overwhelming message of the text. about how humanity is in rebellion against God, how creation was created perfect, how humanity's rebellion against God brought suffering not only to man, but brought suffering all through creation, that from the beginning of time, even in Genesis, and then God had planned to send his own son, so the Son of God becomes flesh, dwells among us, lives a life we could never live, takes the punishment which we deserve for the sins which we continually to commit. So Isaiah 65:17 then, see, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. Why is a new earth needed? Because the current one is cursed, because Satan dwells here, right? So I wanted to make that correction. Alex did a video where he discussed things with 25 Christians. I only watched the first few minutes so far, but it was easily apparent that this suffering concept, which is all over Scripture, it seems like that point was going to be brought up, but the fella didn't get a chance to bring it up. So Christ is king, every knee will bow. Absolutely. Did the outro, then I had something to add here. So not only is it the case that a Christian worldview provides us consistent answers and reasons for why suffering exists, it also gives us an answer for why we have a problem with suffering. Like, we see a cute, fluffy animal. I just was looking at my cat, so that's the first thing that came to mind. We see a cute, fluffy animal, and then something tragic is happening to it. Breaks our heart, right? You see a kid with separated parents, and that's clearly not something that should be, right? So Christianity provides us a reason for why we have kind of this deep, indwelt hunger for a world which is very different than this one, for a world which does not have all the suffering. And then atheism doesn't provide us any answers for why these feelings are so strong, nor does it necessarily give us an answer to condemn suffering, because there are no moral oughts. I believe that's David Hume, right? I hope it's David Hume. But there are no moral oughts in atheism. Things are as they are. There is no living ought, right? There's no living way that it should be. There is no empirical way that it should be. There is, nothing, tangible. There is nothing concrete. There was no plan that was set for how things should be, right? If we're all just, the result of random chance, if it's a mass domino effect, if we are meaningless, evolved sea scum, then our belief in suffering is completely meaningless. So again, Christ is king, every knee will bow, absolutely, and Christ is king, every knee will bow, absolutely.